World War II has inspired some of the greatest films ever made. Stories of heroism, sacrifice, and history itself. But not every attempt struck gold. Some turned history into Hollywood melodrama. Others twisted facts beyond recognition. These are the World War II movies that promised epic drama and delivered cinematic misfires audiences would rather forget. 1. Pearl Harbor, 2001. When Michael Bay set out to recreate the tragedy of Pearl Harbor, many expected a sweeping war epic in the tradition of Saving Private Ryan. What they got was a 3-hour blend of melodrama, glossy action, and historical revisionism. The film was criticized for turning one of the most devastating attacks in American history into the backdrop for a sappy love triangle. Starring Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett, and Kate Beckinsale, the movie focuses more on romantic rivalries than the Japanese attack. Critics accused it of trivializing history, cramming in corny dialogue, and sacrificing emotional truth for Hollywood spectacle. While the attack sequence is technically impressive, it arrives nearly halfway through the film, after audiences have endured a sluggish, soap opera-style first act. Historians were especially irritated by inaccuracies, including exaggerated heroics and oversimplified geopolitical context. In reality, the events were far more complex, and many key military figures were omitted or altered. Even survivors of Pearl Harbor spoke out, calling the movie disrespectful in its treatment of the tragedy. Despite massive box office earnings, Pearl Harbor failed to resonate as a war film. Instead of standing as a tribute, it became a cautionary tale of how overproduced spectacle and underdeveloped storytelling can undermine history. In the end, its legacy lies more in parody than praise. 2 U-571, 2000. On paper, U-571 had everything: submarine warfare, espionage, and a race to capture the Nazi Enigma code machine. But the film sank in controversy for a glaring reason. It rewrote history in a way that deeply offended the United Kingdom. The true Enigma capture occurred in 1941, when British sailors seized the machine from U-110. In U-571, however, the feat is credited to American forces. British veterans and politicians condemned the film for disrespecting real-life heroes, and even Prime Minister Tony Blair criticized the distortion. Beyond the historical insult, the film struggled with generic action movie plotting. Characters feel one-dimensional, and the suspense, critical in submarine films, often comes off as forced. Instead of the tense claustrophobia seen in classics like Das Boot, U-571 leans on Hollywood clichés, last-second escapes, exaggerated explosions, and dialogue that borders on cartoonish. While it won an Academy Award for Best Sound Editing, the damage to its reputation was irreversible. In the years since, U-571 has become a case study in why war films must treat real history with respect. You can bend details for drama, but erasing the contributions of those who lived and died through it will always sink the story. 3. Red Tails, 2012. Red Tails was meant to be a long-overdue tribute to the Tuskegee Airmen, the pioneering African-American pilots of World War II. Backed by George Lucas and featuring an all-star cast including Cuba Gooding Jr. and Terrence Howard, expectations were high. But while the intention was noble, the execution faltered badly. The film's aerial battle sequences are visually thrilling, but the moments between them often feel painfully flat. Critics pointed to clunky, outdated dialogue that seemed ripped from a 1940s propaganda reel. Except without the charm. Characters speak in clichés, camaraderie feels forced, and dramatic moments are undermined by awkward pacing. Worse, the script sidesteps deeper exploration of the racism the Tuskegee Airmen faced. While the film acknowledges prejudice, it treats it almost like a subplot, rather than a central truth of their journey. This decision robs the story of emotional weight, making the airmen's achievements seem less hard-won than they truly were. Despite its flaws, the movie has been embraced by some as an accessible introduction to the airmen's story. But as a work of cinema, it never soars. For many, Red Tails remains a missed opportunity, a film that could have been great, but settled for being merely good-looking. 4. The Battle of the Bulge, 1965. When The Battle of the Bulge premiered, it was marketed as a sweeping all-star epic that would immortalize one of World War II's most intense confrontations. Warner Brothers spared no expense, filming in Ultra Panavision 70 to give audiences massive panoramic battle scenes. The cast included Henry Fonda, Robert Shaw, and Telly Savalas, names that promised gravitas. But what audiences got instead was an oddly sun-soaked, geographically inaccurate rendition of a battle famous for its snow, ice, and frigid conditions. Shot largely in Spain for cost reasons, the film's rolling hills and warm weather clashed jarringly with the historical reality of the Ardennes in December 1944. Historians and veterans were appalled at the liberties taken with actual events. The timeline was condensed and altered beyond recognition. Character composites replaced real commanders, and even basic military tactics were distorted to fit the plot. Tanks used in the production were not from the World War II era, and some were even post-war American models painted to look German, a fact keen-eyed veterans immediately spotted. Adding to the problem was the script's melodramatic approach. Instead of focusing on the grueling endurance and strategy that defined the real battle, the film leaned heavily on simplified heroics and an almost cartoonish portrayal of German forces. Robert Shaw's Nazi officer is memorable, but more in the vein of a Bond villain than a historically grounded figure. Critics at the time were split. While some praised the action choreography, many felt the film was a betrayal of the true story. General Eisenhower himself publicly criticized the film for its inaccuracies, urging audiences not to take it as history. Today, the Battle of the Bulge is remembered less as a faithful war epic and more as a cautionary tale. If you strip history of its authenticity, even the grandest production values can't save it. 5. Windtalkers, 2002. John Woo's Windtalkers promised to spotlight a remarkable and underappreciated chapter of World War II history, the Navajo Code Talkers, whose unbreakable language code was instrumental in the Pacific Theater. With Nicolas Cage and Christian Slater leading the cast, and Woo at the helm, expectations were high for a mix of thrilling action and heartfelt tribute. Unfortunately, the finished product fell victim to Hollywood's tendency to reframe history around fictional white protagonists. Instead of centering the narrative on the Navajo characters, played by Adam Beach and Roger Willie, the story focuses primarily on Cage's battle-weary Marine assigned to protect a code talker at all costs. This choice sparked criticism for sidelining the very heroes the film was supposed to honor. The film's action sequences, while visually dynamic in true Woo style, often cross the line into implausibility. Stylized slow-motion gunfights and dramatic explosions work in face-off, but here they jar against the gravity of war. The quieter moments, which could have offered genuine insight into the Navajo experience, are brief and underdeveloped. Worse, the historical inaccuracies pile up. Woo's depiction of the Marines' orders to protect the code at all costs is exaggerated to the point of moral caricature, suggesting killing code talkers was a common practice, a claim historians dispute. When released, Windtalkers flopped at the box office and earned tepid reviews. Many Native American advocates expressed disappointment, noting that an opportunity to educate mainstream audiences about the Navajo role in World War II had been lost under layers of Hollywood gloss. In the end, Windtalkers is remembered less for what it showed and more for what it failed to show, a stirring true story buried beneath the tropes of an ordinary action film. 6. Midway, 2019. Roland Emmerich's Midway aimed to be the definitive cinematic retelling of the pivotal 1942 battle in the Pacific. With a sprawling ensemble cast, Woody Harrelson, Patrick Wilson, Dennis Quaid, and more, and a budget exceeding $100 million, it promised to combine historical fidelity with blockbuster spectacle. Technically, the film is more accurate than Emmerich's previous work. Pearl Harbor still haunts his reputation, but accuracy alone couldn't save it from narrative and tonal problems. From the opening scenes, Midway struggles to balance historical exposition with emotional engagement. Characters are sketched in broad strokes, often reduced to war movie archetypes. The hotshot pilot, the stoic commander, the loyal wife waiting at home. The heavy reliance on CGI also proved divisive. While some aerial sequences are breathtaking, others feel artificial, almost like cutscenes from a high-end video game. This artificiality undermines the visceral intensity that made earlier war films resonate, leaving the viewer dazzled but emotionally detached. Dialogue is another weak point. Expository exchanges feel forced, as though characters are delivering history lessons rather than speaking naturally. Emotional beats, such as scenes of personal loss, are rushed, giving the impression of a checklist rather than a lived experience. Critics were lukewarm, praising the intention but faulting the execution. Some historians appreciated its attempt at accuracy, but general audiences found it lacking the human drama necessary for lasting impact. In the end, Midway became a strange paradox. A war movie that gets many facts right, yet fails to make you truly feel them. In the shadow of earlier masterpieces like Torah, it stands as a technically competent but emotionally hollow retelling of history's turning point. 7. Enigma, 2001. Enigma had all the elements for a gripping historical thriller: wartime code-breaking, Nazi espionage, and a love affair tangled in betrayal. Based loosely on Robert Harris's novel, the film centers on a brilliant mathematician, played by Dougray Scott, tasked with deciphering Nazi U-boat codes while navigating the mysterious disappearance of a former lover. With Kate Winslet co-starring and Mick Jagger among the producers, expectations were high for an intelligent, suspenseful drama. Yet, the finished product left critics and audiences underwhelmed. The pacing is uneven, bogging down in long stretches of romantic intrigue that overshadow the high-stakes urgency of the Enigma code-breaking effort. Rather than building sustained tension around one of the most consequential technological battles of the war, the film dilutes its focus with melodrama and soap opera-level misunderstandings. Perhaps its biggest flaw is its fictionalization of history. While the real Bletchley Park was a hive of cryptographic genius, Enigma invents scenarios that undermine the true achievements of the codebreakers. In reality, Alan Turing and his colleagues were the driving force behind breaking the code, yet the film sidesteps Turing entirely, replacing him with a romanticized composite character. Historians and World War II enthusiasts criticized this omission, feeling it robbed the film of authenticity. Visually, the production is handsome, with period costumes and sets that evoke the era, but the cinematography lacks urgency. Even scenes meant to depict the frantic decoding of messages feel oddly sedate. The result is a war story that feels curiously detached from the war itself. In the end, Enigma stands as a missed opportunity, A film that could have combined romance and history in a taut thriller, but instead drifts into forgettable mediocrity. It's a reminder that in historical dramas, authenticity and tension are not optional. They are the heart of the story. 8. Force 10 from Navarone, 1978. Following the massive success of The Guns of Navarone, 1961, it was inevitable that Hollywood would try to cash in with a sequel. Force 10 from Navarone brought back the basic premise, a daring commando mission behind enemy lines, but with a new cast led by Harrison Ford, Robert Shaw, and Edward Fox. On paper, this seemed promising. In execution, it became a prime example of why not all sequels should be made. The story, loosely adapted from Alistair MacLean's novel, involves a mission to destroy a key bridge in Yugoslavia. While the premise has potential for taut suspense, the plot is riddled with contrivances and implausible twists that strain credibility. Characters miraculously survive impossible situations. Enemies fall for painfully obvious ruses, and the narrative lurches from one loosely connected set piece to another. Production problems also plagued the film. By the time it was shot, Robert Shaw was visibly unwell, and his performance, while committed, lacked the vitality audiences remembered from earlier roles. The tone is uneven, sometimes aiming for gritty realism, other times veering into almost cartoonish action. Special effects, particularly the climactic bridge explosion, were underwhelming even by late 70s standards, leaving the finale flat instead of explosive. While Ford was riding high from Star Wars, his role here is underwritten, offering little more than charm to a film already short on substance. Critics were lukewarm, and box office numbers reflected audience disinterest. Over time, Force 10 from Navarone has been largely forgotten, except as a cautionary tale in war film circles. When you strip away the tension, grit, and heart from a great original, all you're left with is an imitation no one asked for. Ninth Attack, 1956. Directed by Robert Aldrich, Attack aimed to be a hard-hitting drama about cowardice and corruption within the U.S. Army during World War II. With Jack Palance, Eddie Albert, and Lee Marvin in leading roles, it had the talent to deliver a blistering critique of military incompetence. And for its time, the film was indeed provocative. Too provocative for some. The plot centers on a morally bankrupt captain, Albert, whose cowardice repeatedly puts his men in danger, while Palance's character seethes with rage and thirst for retribution. The premise is ripe for tension, but Aldrich's execution pushes performances and scenarios into melodramatic territory. Palance delivers his lines with such raw intensity that subtlety goes out the window, while Albert's portrayal of the captain veers into caricature. Critics in the 1950s were divided. Some praised the film's boldness in questioning military leadership during a decade steeped in patriotic sentiment. Others found it heavy-handed, with dialogue that spells out themes instead of letting them emerge naturally. The action sequences, though ambitious, lack the realism of other war films of the era, sometimes coming off as staged theater rather than visceral combat. Adding to the controversy, the U.S. Army reportedly refused to cooperate with the production, unhappy with its portrayal of command incompetence. While this lent the film a rebellious edge, it also limited its resources, resulting in battle scenes that feel small-scale compared to the epic canvases audiences expected from World War II films. Today, Attack is remembered more for its intentions than its execution, a film that swung hard at military hypocrisy but missed the mark in emotional and narrative balance. It's a reminder that even important themes can falter when weighed down by excess and imbalance. 10. The Monuments Men, 2014. When George Clooney announced The Monuments Men, the concept sounded irresistible. A star-studded cast rescuing priceless art from Nazi looting during the closing days of World War II. Based on the true story of the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program, it promised a blend of history, suspense, and cultural reverence. With Clooney directing and a cast including Matt Damon, Bill Murray, Kate Blanchett, and John Goodman, expectations were sky-high. Yet, when the film arrived, it was met with a resounding shrug. Critics faulted its muddled tone, unable to decide whether it was a light-hearted adventure in the vein of Ocean's 11 or a solemn war drama. The pacing is strangely disjointed, with the narrative hopping between locations and characters without building consistent tension. Moments of levity often clash awkwardly with scenes meant to convey the horrors of war. The historical premise is inherently compelling. A small band of scholars and artists risking their lives to save humanity's cultural treasures. However, the film struggles to capture the urgency of their mission. Instead of immersing viewers in the chaos and stakes of wartime Europe, much of the screen time is spent on talky exposition or meandering subplots. Clooney's direction also leans heavily into sentimentality, but without the emotional grounding to make it resonate. The result is a film that feels strangely hollow despite its moral message. Even strong performances from the cast can't rescue the script from its lack of focus. By the time the credits roll, The Monuments Men feels less like a war film and more like a glossy travelogue through war-torn Europe. For a story about preserving art under fire, the film ironically fails to craft a work of art itself. 11. 30 Seconds Over. Tokyo, 1944. Released during World War II, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo was designed as wartime propaganda, dramatizing the famous Doolittle raid on Japan in 1942. Directed by Mervyn LeRoy and starring Spencer Tracy, Van Johnson, and Robert Mitchum, it was well received in its day, winning praise for boosting morale during the war. But, with the passage of time, its flaws have become glaring. The film's biggest weakness is its uneven pacing. The actual raid, the dramatic centerpiece, takes up only a small portion of the runtime. Much of the film is devoted to domestic scenes, romantic farewells, and idealized portraits of home front life. While these moments served a purpose in 1944, they now feel overly sentimental, slowing the narrative to a crawl. Its portrayal of the Japanese is also steeped in the caricature and propaganda of the era, reducing complex human beings to faceless enemies. This lack of nuance robs the film of the deeper resonance found in later war dramas. On a technical level, some of the aerial sequences remain impressive for the time, but the staging of combat is stiff by modern standards. Performances are earnest, yet often too polished to feel authentic. There's little sense of the exhaustion, fear, or chaos that real pilots endured. While 30 Seconds Over Tokyo still holds historical interest as a relic of wartime filmmaking, it doesn't hold up as a gripping narrative. What was once stirring propaganda is now a slow-moving, sanitized portrait that leaves modern audiences disengaged. 12. The Last Drop, 2006. Obscure even among war film enthusiasts, The Last Drop is a strange mix of war drama and heist caper that fails on both fronts. Set during Operation Market Garden, it follows a ragtag group of Allied soldiers on a mission to recover Nazi gold hidden in the Netherlands. On paper, it's Kelly's Heroes meets A Bridge Too Far. In practice, it's a tonal mess. The film tries to balance gritty wartime action with slapstick humor, but the two styles never mesh. One moment, characters are dodging bullets in tense urban combat. The next, they're engaging in comedic bickering that undercuts the stakes. The script is filled with stock characters, each painted in broad strokes without meaningful development. Budget limitations are painfully obvious. Sets feel sparse, battle scenes are small in scale, and the overall visual quality has the look of a made-for-TV movie. Costuming and props lack authenticity, with uniforms and weapons that appear mismatched or historically off. The editing compounds the problem, with abrupt tonal shifts and poorly staged action sequences that sap any sense of momentum. Even competent actors like Billy Zane can't elevate the material beyond forgettable mediocrity. Critics were almost unanimous in their dismissal, noting that the film seemed unsure whether to be a war epic, a buddy comedy, or a treasure hunt, and ultimately succeeded at none. In the crowded field of World War II cinema, the last drop sinks to the bottom, a film whose title unintentionally describes the amount of interest it holds by the final frame. World War II's legacy in cinema is vast, but these films prove that even history's greatest stories can be mishandled. Whether through inaccuracy, poor pacing, or misplaced tone, they missed their mark. Which of these have you seen? Share your thoughts, and remember to like, subscribe, and join the discussion.